So I started out actually as a different major in college, and then I took one journalism class and kind of fell in love with it. The professor that I took it with, she was like an old school newspaper journalist. She actually reported, she was one of the like breaking news reporters on the Charles Manson case, and she actually corresponded with Charles Manson back and forth like when she was writing her stories. She worked in San Francisco, but anyways, so she kind of made me fall in love with journalism. So I switched my major and I started doing reporting just on campus. And I guess I could just talk about that now because that's kind of where I started with the disability stuff. So one of our projects my senior year was trying to pick a topic that you think would be impactful and informative to the student body. I went to school in California, by the way, and watched that Netflix docuseries called Love on the Spectrum. I don't know if you've heard of it or if you've
Mhm.
seen it before, but I watched that and was just so inspired by all of the people that were on that show, just kind of bearing their souls and like trying to find love. It was so inspiring. So I was like, I wonder how many students who are on the spectrum go to Cal Poly, my college. And so I started doing some research and found that there was like a whole center for students with autism. And they all were like super normal, chill, nice kids. And so I asked them if I could follow, I asked like two of them if I could follow them around campus for like a couple of days and just like see how their day to day goes and like what types of challenges that they have that they adjust to be a college student and still kind of do all the same things that everyone else is doing that doesn't have disabilities. And I kind of found out just through the interview process and sitting down with them and then also shadowing them that there's like really minor adjustments that they all made that just kind of basically gave them the ability to do everything that everyone else is doing, just like a little bit differently. And it was super cool and inspiring. And I did like a video series on them and then a web version, like an article version. And it was just cool. Like they were really nice people. And the hard thing with ASD, autism spectrum disorder, is a lot of those people you didn't even realize that they had it because they look just like everyone else. You can't see a disability. So that was one of the things that interested me. And I found out the strangest thing was at the very end of the whole story process, one of my best friends, she wasn't in my sorority, but she was one of my really good friends. She has ASD and she had just never told me. But there was these little quirks that she had that I'd never really even noticed before. But she opened up to me and was like, yeah, I actually have autism. And like, I don't really share it with anyone, but it is something that I struggle with. And like, I do have to wear like noise canceling headphones in certain places. And there are things that I deal with. And so it's strange, like the whole project kind of ended up coming back to me and my friendship. And I know it's a long story short, but that was kind of what got me into it. And then that opened the doors for journalism for me. So I started out in local news in Eugene, Oregon, making literally $12.50 an hour. I was a reporter. I started out kind of 9 to 5, like dayside reporting, and then I got promoted to an anchor position, and that was I would have to show up at 10 o'clock at night, and I wouldn't get to leave until 10 o'clock the next morning. So it was like I produced the show, I anchored the show, I wrote, edited all the video and everything that went along with it, and that was on the 8 a.m. morning newscasts Saturdays and Sundays. And so I did that for a year and a half and was pretty burnt out, and then started applying elsewhere and got a job in Charlotte, which was a big market jump. TV markets are kind of finicky, so it's like I was in market 117, and that's like just because it's a smaller city. But when I moved to Charlotte, it was market 21, I think, in the country. Charlotte's a lot bigger, so you have a lot more of a viewing audience to watch. And obviously the ads are more expensive there. So you get paid a lot more. So that was cool. I finally got to like not have to DoorDash on the side and like actually got to just like be a reporter and do my thing. And then I moved up to DC after about 3 years in Charlotte and eventually landed here at the National News Desk and have been loving it. I've been here for about 6 months and it's been cool to do like national news stories, not just local. Because the local was like, there would be something crazy happening in whether it be DC or across the world, something crazy would happen and we'd have to find out how to localize it. Like, why does this matter to people in Charlotte? Which
Mm.
was, it's important to do, but it's nice to finally be at the national level where you don't have to figure out how to get like people to care. It's just like, this is why you should care regardless of where you are. So that was, sorry to make that long winded, Travis, but that was kind of my journey with journalism.
That's really cool. And I don't think I shared this with you, but I went to school in Southern California as well.
Oh, where'd you go?
Yeah, I went to Azusa Pacific University.
Oh, I know Azusa Pacific. That's awesome. Did you like it?
I liked it a lot. And I think very similar to your story, I remember one time I was at the cafeteria eating with a friend of mine, and four of his friends came and sat down at the table with me. And I had never met them, but I started sharing my story of my disability and why I use crutches and a wheelchair and how I was born with a hole in my heart and cerebral palsy. And then about the next day or two later, they found out where I lived. I lived in an apartment across from the campus. It was owned by the school, but they found out where I lived and they knocked on my door and they're like, "Hey, sorry to bother you, but we were just so moved by your story that we wrote down on a piece of paper all the ways that we want to like help." And I had never said like I want to do any like advocacy work on campus, but they're like, we were thinking that we could start a group on campus to raise awareness of individuals with disabilities. And so that's how I got started. And we formed this group. And one of the things that we did was raise money for a front load washing machine for this student in a wheelchair because it was hard for her to do her laundry where she was living. And so that's kind of how I got started. And it it really just propelled me to where I am now. Um, Going back to your friend's story, who has autism, I was given a talk to fifth graders about 2 weeks ago. And usually when I speak to them, I share just my disability and then I give them an opportunity to ask me questions. And at the end of it, one of the kids raised his hand and said, "I have autism." And it's hard for me to read. So I use this pen to go over the words and I use these headphones so I can hear. And I don't think any of his peers like knew that. So then after he said it, other students started raising their hands to tell me what their disabilities were. And I was like, what is going on here? And the teachers were crying, and it was just like a
Oh,
really powerful um just moment there where the students just felt really safe,
yeah.
and I just appreciated their vulnerability and just the space for me to share my story. And so I think parallel to the work that you do to amplify people's stories and investigate, I think it's really speaks to your curiosity and your ability to navigate and storytell in such a brilliant way.
Thanks, Travis. Yeah, that means a lot. And that's so special. I've seen all the different work that you've been doing on your Instagram, and it's so cool to see you just talking about it. And I watched your TED Talk too, which I thought was awesome. But just like getting it out in the open, and you can kind of see the kids, like I've seen some of the videos, like at first they're like a little bit unsure of like how they should act, but just seeing how like open and gracious and kind you are, you lead with such kindness. I think that just kind of opens up the conversation with anything. Same thing with journalism, same thing with talking about these things in front of people. It's like I feel like if you lead with like I'm open to hear what's going on, I'm curious, I'm genuinely wondering like what's happening in your life and want to share that, people are a lot more willing to open up and just be, I don't know, willing to share things that they might not normally talk about with friends or even family.
For sure. Was there one story in particular that you've covered throughout your years, disability related, that has stood out to you?
Yeah, and it's weird that you say that because I didn't even think about the fact that this was a disability story until now, like until this conversation. Because I was thinking, like, what's my favorite story? And this comes to mind every time. But then I'm thinking, like, wow, this is actually also like kind of a disability story. Okay, so it was on it actually got nominated for a regional Emmy. We lost, we didn't win, but it was nominated. So I hold on to that at least. But it was super impactful. It was about these police officers who in Charlotte who were kind of basically forced into retirement after being diagnosed with PTSD. And they don't have like necessarily the mental capacity, not mental capacity, I don't know what you would want to call it, but they don't have like what it takes to still be on the streets and be in those high stress combat situations. So they kind of have to retire at that point. But a lot of them get completely cut off from the health benefits from the city's, health insurance. So they get like however much amount they get in retirement a month. It's not that much, especially if they weren't on the force between like a certain amount of years or before a certain amount of time. A lot of these guys are drowning in medical debt from going to counseling A lot of them have also physical injuries that they're still struggling with. They're going to, trying to get medication to cope with the PTSD side effects. And I did the story just because it was crazy to see these people who have served their community, some of them 25 plus years, who are barely even able to go to the grocery store because they can't afford medication to like be in situations where there's a lot of people around, and it's really difficult for them. So we did that story a couple of years ago, and I had like 8 officers who came forward, former officers, who talked about this, and it was super powerful. But at the end of the day, nothing was really done by the city still
Mm,
to figure this out, at least that I've last checked. And so that was a story that even relates to this, because it was PTSD is a disability. I mean, there's nothing that
mm,
they can do about it. It's not like they're making this up. They've been through hell. And when you hear their stories, you're like, I understand why you have PTSD. I can't even imagine doing one day of that, let alone 25 years of those types of situations.
mhm.
So that was my favorite story, just because it was so inspiring to see these guys, especially they're like really tough, and like they're normally just like shooting the shit, and like they're funny, kind of like burly, like old police, not old, but they're, older police officers who've been through it. And then you see them open up about something that's so sensitive and powerful, and you're like, oh my gosh, like this makes you even more stronger than I ever could have imagined. So that was kind of the other, like, I guess, dichotomy with the story.
That's really cool. And I think that, it's unfortunate that you didn't win, but the fact that the story got nominated so many times, because usually I think disability related stories really can get like demonized, and there's not as much like press. And I think that there needs to be more coverage, especially on a positive level when it comes to disability stories, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think so too. I know. I'm surprised that there's not, especially seeing with so many people who struggle with disabilities, whether they're visible or are not visible it's strange that there isn't, but I'm sure that I think that this Department of Education story that saw, that basically connected us, I feel like that is going to bring so much more attention to this, I guess, as it comes to light and as we see what happens in this next administration.
Hmm, for sure. What do you think was the biggest shift from going to, would you say regional in Charlotte to the national news desk?
Yeah, the biggest shift, I guess, was national stories, but also just seeing how things work so much more closely up in DC. I briefly worked on Capitol Hill before I started at the national news desk, because I kind of wanted to see what was going on outside of news, and I was interested, and I wanted to take a little bit of a detour just so I wasn't constantly only in news. I wanted to try other things. And seeing at like the national level, just like how much goes on behind closed doors, especially on the Hill, especially in politics. And I mean, I got to admit, it was a little disheartening. And that's why I went back into news, because I just don't think I could see myself long term working in politics necessarily. But there is a lot more that goes on. There's a lot more that goes into things, especially bills and things that are brought to the forefront. There's so much that happens before that's even making headlines. I think that that's something that I just didn't really expect quite as much. And at the local level, you're so much more micro focused, like on city council meetings and things that directly impact your neighborhood. But then when you see things that impact millions of people, the stakes are so much higher. And yeah, it's a lot more pressure when you're covering national stories, just to make sure that you're not making mistakes and you're doing all the research and you're finding, reputable sources that you can trust. Because otherwise, journalism is having a rough go right now, especially with our reputation. So it's even more important on the national level, because your story gets seen, by you. And like, I wouldn't expect people who have reached out to me who see my stories that I'm like, wow, this is high stakes. I cannot make any mistakes, because it's a lot more intense.
Yeah, because you're on YouTube. Do you feel like you're more visible now that you're at the national news desk than before?
Yeah, absolutely. Like Charlotte, I want to say, and my station was phenomenal, by the way, not to knock them. Like my news director was literally like the best boss I've ever had. He fought for his reporters. I almost got like kicked off of a campus one time, and he came and sat on the curb with me as like the police were coming. Like he's like an old school journalist, like fighting for the people type guy, but our viewership just wasn't anything like it is on the national level. Like my YouTube videos would get like, I don't know, like 300 views, 400 views. But here, I think the Department of Education video that you saw got like, I don't know, like 80,000 views or something. Like it's crazy. And you do have so much more of a reach. So it makes it a little bit more stressful because you really don't want to mess up when you know that a lot more people are going to see this.
Sure. Yeah. And then speaking of, what was it like covering the presidential race?
Yeah, I actually covered so I covered the 2016 race when I was in college. And I say covered, like we did like a whole live stream on election night where myself and my co-anchor Connor like literally sat there for 4 hours live, like talking about the race results. And I almost wish I could watch it back now because it's probably so cringe and like so bad. Like our production value was like literally like a news station in a college campus. Mind you, it was a pretty good one, but still like we were college kids talking about the presidential race, which was just kind of comical, but we still did it and it came out, just fine. But that was 2016. But then by the time 2020 rolled around, I was in Oregon. So that was really interesting covering it there because I was anchoring and I was making sure I included all my national stories in my newscast because I was the one writing it. Normally, anchors, just to give you a behind the scenes look, and I don't know if you're already aware of this, but they, for the most part, come in and they read scripts and they make changes on kind of how they like things to sound and make them sound more like themselves. But they don't write any of the scripts. All the scripts that go into a newscast that they are reading are written by a whole team of producers behind the scenes. But when I was in Oregon, it was such a small station. I was the team of producers and I was the anchor. So writing for the presidential election was kind of like which stories I thought were important to cover. And it was all basically up to my discretion on what I thought was important. So that was actually really cool. And then covering this presidential election, it was crazy just being at the national level and having to really look at everything, not just how it's going to impact Oregon or Charlotte, but how this is going to impact like what was going on in each state, all the different races, congressional races, Senate races. There were so many more things to look at and to talk about. It almost made it a little bit, I guess, like it was easier to come up with story ideas because there were so many things to be talking about. I mean, talk about headlines. This year was like a record breaking year for political headlines, just so much going on. So
Yeah,
yeah, that it was cool though.
that's really neat. And just to hear the progression of the different places that you've covered the presidential elections is, yeah, it's really cool.
Thanks, Travis. Yeah, it's funny looking back. Did you do stuff in college? Like, do you ever read through like your old papers and stuff or like things that you did in school and you're like, oh my gosh, like how far I've come, you know?
Yes, for sure. I remember taking a journalism class, and the stuff that I did there was just not even close to the stuff that you do or the people that I know that are in journalism. But yeah, looking back, I'm just like, man, even like the first podcast episode that I did was just so different than what I'm doing now. But I think having to go through like your lumps and just kind of figure things out, and then you kind of tweak it and then adjust, and then you're evolving and stuff is really neat.
Yeah. How did you get into the TEDx talks? Like, how did that all work out?
So, I'd like to tell people that it was this huge dream that I had, but I was on Facebook and I saw that there was this call for speakers. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And I'm like, man, that would be nice to kind of give a talk. But I'm like, I don't know what I would talk about. Well, I had just finished a presentation in grad school on social inclusion in sports. And because I used to coach wheelchair basketball and been involved with adaptive sports, I used to get able-bodied individuals that come to the practice and play with the kids. So I'm like, oh, like sports is used as like this language to bridge the gap between disabilities and non-disabilities. So I'm like, I wonder if I could just change that to social inclusion and education because I'd been a substitute teacher and the students would always ask me questions about my disability. So I wrote up a proposal like the night before the deadline was due and I submitted it. And I was just like, all right, it's 11:50. The deadline is midnight. So I'm like, I got 10 minutes to spare and I didn't even think about it. And so then funny enough, 3 months go by and I'm in my legal rights for persons with disabilities class because I still remember it vividly. it's like halfway through this 3 hour class and I check my phone and I get the email saying, congratulations, you've been accepted. And I couldn't like, I was so excited.
Oh my God.
I was telling my professor, I'm like, Dr. Luckison, like I'm doing this TEDx talk about like disability inclusion. And yeah, it was really neat. And I deflect and I give all the praise to my TEDx coach, Angie, who really helped me form this. But that's really opened up a lot of doors. And I have gotten inquiries of people asking like, how did you do it? Can you help me? And I'm always willing to give like advice and help people because I think anybody can be a public speaker. And I think, I don't know if you've seen this just in what you've covered, or even with your friend now that you know that she has autism, but I think people with disabilities, like they can either get magnified or the things that they do can be magnified because of their disability. So if somebody sees me on stage with my crutches, they're like, "Oh my gosh, that's so powerful, Travis." And like, I could never do that. And I'm just like, well, I'm no different and no better than you who may not have a disability, but you still have a story to share. So I everybody's unique. I don't think I'm more unique than any one person, especially because I'm a disability. And I'm just willing to help and be a resource to anybody that wants to learn or like emulate, duplicate what I'm doing. Cause like I want people to succeed. I want people to do what I do or attempting to do.
Yeah, I love that. That's really inspiring, especially because like you're already dealing with stuff on a day to day that like a lot of other people don't have to deal with. So it's cool that you still want to put in the time to do this. That's really, really inspiring, Travis. That's awesome.
Thank you, Emma. And the way that you communicated that, there's not a lot of people that have that understanding. And I think because of your experience with your friend and your sorority and all the stories that you've done throughout the years, I'm sure you've built up a level of empathy that a lot of people don't have because you've seen a lot.
Yeah, definitely. And there's so many different, I feel like, types of disabilities and then things that aren't even labeled as disabilities that people struggle with that I've just interviewed because of being in journalism and being a reporter that you meet that you wouldn't normally meet or experience anything with. And so I guess, yeah, like I don't know. I never considered myself like a particularly like super empathetic person. That sounds bad, but I guess I've never been like a softie. I don't cry that often. I'm not like someone that's like, I don't know. I know that sounds weird, but like, I guess all these people that I've met just the last 5 years as a reporter, you see so many people that are dealing with things that are so much more intense than anything that I've ever dealt with. And I'm like, geez, like I am such a wimp compared to all these other people. Like, even just, you know, like there's so many people that I meet that I just feel really almost like a little bit just like out of touch. Like I've been so out of touch my whole life because I don't have any disabilities. I don't, I grew up with two parents. I grew up in a family that was able to help me pay for like going through college, all those things. So like just being privileged enough to have those things has made me, and then meeting people who don't, it's just kind of like eye opening. Like there's no reason for me to be complaining at this point at all. And I have so much more respect for people like you who are able to like have something that you're dealing with day to day, but then still allocate time for others. That's really like it's shocking, and it's not something that a lot of people do on the day to day.
Oh, thank you. No, I
Yeah.
appreciate that. And, I wouldn't minimize what you said because I think for me, I have a lot of empathy, but when I'm talking to people, like their emotions, I tend to internalize them. So I think with you, I'm using your words. I'm not affirming that you don't have empathy like you're saying. With your personality, your ability to cover stories in like emotional settings and not get wrapped up in the emotions, I think allows you to have more energy to interact with people and you're not carrying all that weight, which in some ways can be a good thing because you're able to still focus and not get wrapped up in people's emotions when you're interviewing them. Cause I'm sure you, like I said, you've seen a lot of things. And so for me, it would be hard to go into a place where I just feel so sad for the person. And then it's just like, oh man, I have to do three more stories. Like, what if they're like this? And I don't know if I'm going to be able to make it through the day. But, I think that what you've gone through isn't um, any worse in terms of, well, I haven't gone through these hardships, but what you have built up is just this ability to want to understand people and do the best job that you can. And I think that just speaks to your determination and your ambition to just keep going through these different markets. And like you've moved, like I know what it's like to move to for college and then moving again. And that is really difficult. And so you have that experience. You haven't lived in one place your whole life. And now you're on a national stage, which is to me, I would be like terrified every time that I would go. If I were there, I would be terrified just to speak and worry every time, like, oh my gosh, I can't mess this up, and the bright lights, and you're in DC. So I give you a lot of credit for the work that you've done.
Thanks, Travis. That means a lot. I don't know if I believe you that you wouldn't be terrified. I don't think I'd be able to make it up on the TEDx stage. So I don't know if I believe that, but I do appreciate it. It is a little scary sometimes, but you get used to it kind of sometimes. I don't know. There's days where I'm really nervous and then there's days where I'm not. I guess it depends on the story. If the story is a lot more heavy, you really don't want to mess up. And so it's your nerves are there. But when it's kind of a lighthearted thing, like I was filling in reporting last week, and there was like one day where my story was on like eating healthy chocolate, like dark chocolate, like apparently like helps like reduce the risk of like type 2 diabetes. And it's like it's just not that heavy. So you can kind of like laugh about it. And if I stumbled along, it was like whatever. But when you're doing a story that's more, impactful, you're like, oh gosh, this is not the time for me to like go blank and not think of what to say.
Sure. Yeah, for sure. Um, well, where can people find you, Emma?
I am on Twitter, or I guess you call it X now. I still call it Twitter. What do you call tweets, by the way? Or are they X's or
Oh
what do you call that?
gosh. I probably would still call them tweets. I mean,
I know
yeah.
I don't know what to call them. Okay, but I'm on X or Twitter or whatever you want to call it as at Emma_Withrow. And then also on Instagram. Instagram is kind of like a weird place for me because I still post a lot of my stories, but then I also post my personal stuff. So it's at Emma Withrow on Instagram. But I don't really know. Do you have like a personal page versus a professional page for your stuff, Travis? Or like how do you navigate that?
So I have my personal page, but then my podcast Instagram, but that it's hard to keep up multiple accounts. I'm not on X, but I don't use my podcast Instagram as much because I have a way more followers on my personal one. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's difficult. But in the new year, I'm going to be adding a newsletter and just other ways for people to consume my content because I really want to get more of my stories out, like personally, but then other people through my podcast and just really build up, I guess. I mean, it's silly for me to call it like a personal brand, but I really want to do more speaking and engage people in that way in the new year. So that's kind of how I
Yeah.
navigate it.
I love that. Have you thought about writing a book?
I am working on it. Yes, I have a couple. Yeah, I have a couple ideas, and so once it's out, we can chat again. And
I
but yeah,
know.
yeah, it's challenging because I've been asked that many times, and a lot of a lot of people that I've seen with disabilities, they write, and I'm not knocking them, so it may sound like it, but I'm not. They write their personal memoirs of how they overcome challenges with the disability, and it's just like, do I want to be another person in this like white noise where it's like I've got crutches and I've done this, and it's like who wants to hear from me? And so I always struggle with, can I confidently put out something that will resonate with people, or like how do I navigate that? So trying to figure out the best like angle, but yeah, I am working on a book for sure.
Yeah. I know. I feel like with all your work that you do just on a day to day and like with younger kids and that type of thing, I feel like there's so much more to write about with that. And then talking about the fact that you have a disability could be like towards the end of the book. Maybe people don't even realize you have a disability throughout the whole book, and then you kind of reveal it at the end or something. I don't know, because I agree there's more to your story than just that, obviously.
It's funny, Emma, because I grew up not wanting to do like anything related to disability. I wanted to be a writer. Like the main thing was like I wanted to write because growing up, I always felt like I got just so much attention because of my disability that would make me uncomfortable. I'm like, but if
Yeah.
I'm writing, then people would only judge what's on the page and they wouldn't know that I had a disability. So if I'm just writing, that is like the biggest like compliment for someone to criticize or praise it. So that's why I've thought about just reverting back to doing more writing in this upcoming
Yeah.
year and just focusing on that because yeah, I don't want everybody just to know that I have a disability. I want people to know that I'm a holistic person and I have many sides to me. And, the things that I'm able to contribute are not just like advocacy disability related. It's like I can write um an article or a book that can touch someone's life and they wouldn't even know that I had a disability. So yeah, I agree with you 100%.
Yeah, I think that would be really cool. And I understand what you're saying. I get that. I mean, not from experience, but I could understand why that would be the case. But it seems like you're doing a lot. You've got your hands full already right now, Travis. You have so much going on, it seems like. So I guess keep up the good work because I can't imagine juggling that many things. You're doing amazing though.
Thank you, Emma. And I can't wait for people to hear this episode. And oh, yeah. And so, what about the national news? How can people find you there?
Yeah, I think that if you just Google my name, with the National News Desk, it should pop up all of my articles. And I guess if you're wanting to watch though, like actually watch on your TV, it's funny, nobody uses like cable anymore, but you can watch on YouTube TV. Obviously, we're live every single night at 10, and then we have morning shows too, but which our channel is just the National News Desk. But we're located in a bunch of different cities across the US, and it depends on if your city has a local news station that's owned by Sinclair, strangely enough. That's our parent company is Sinclair. So you have to look up on our website, like the channel finder. If you type in your zip code, you can find out if you have a Sinclair station, and then you can watch, on the different times that we have it on. But yeah, it's kind of confusing. My parents are still having a hard time with it too, actually. But they turn me on YouTube, but having it on the channel, they don't have our channel in their hometown. So when they're like on vacation, they turn it on. But anyways, that's how you find it. Long story short.
Cool. Cool. Well, everybody check out Emma and the national news. And yeah, well, we'll be in touch soon.
Thanks so much, Travis. It was great talking to you.